The following is a conversation with guitarist and improviser Drew Wesely. Drew is an incredible guitarist who's doing a lot in New York right now in the free improvisation community. And we originally met at the New England Conservatory, where we both started in, I believe, fall 2015. I was starting an undergrad degree. Drew was starting a master's degree. I'm going to keep this super brief. I think this is a great conversation. We talk about his early development as a guitarist. We talk about his process of working on his time and some of the things that he had to get together during his first year of undergrad when he was studying jazz guitar. And then we also talk about his journey into free improvisation, how he approaches prepared guitar now, and some of his more advanced thinking about sensitivity to sound and things like world building in music. All right, let's jump into it. Thanks for watching. It's been good. Yeah, I was kind of like really focused on a lot of like building, I guess, infrastructure in my own life for like 2 years, which included the teaching thing and also included building like a recording studio and stuff. And it's really only been in like the last 2 weeks that I've been like starting to like go out again, like be a social person. So it's been cool. And it's also been a little bit like when you haven't been taking in that much information besides things you're seeking out, just like opening the floodgates to like everything that can be experienced by just going to a bunch of like art and like music things in New York's like it's kind of intense, but ultimately good. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a cornucopia.
totally. Um, yeah, what have you been working on lately?
Um, well, lots of things. Got a couple records I'm working on, particularly like a series of releases for this LA-based label, Dinzu Artifacts.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a quintet record. Um, Featuring myself, Lester St. Louis, Carlo Costa, and then Laura Cox and Camilo Angeles. And so, as a like a kind of preparatory or promotional thing for it, we're doing a series of 5 solo tapes on the label in the early part of the year. So that's been something I've been really focused on recently. But there's always so many things happening. It's like it's more like the trouble is how to I don't know how to prioritize things and how to talk about what's most salient because it's always juggling a lot of different projects. I have I have a duo piece with cellist Aaliyah Ultan coming up pretty soon. I have a let's see what else. I have this ongoing collaboration with a movement artist, Yoko Murakami. We created a piece actually last year for Mabau Mines, which is a an experimental theater venue in the Lower East Side,
Mhm.
and we're continuing that piece this next year. So working on some stuff for that. Um, and I'm about to leave for Japan for another thing. Um, so that's actually in like 2 weeks. So always kind of trying to prioritize like how to fit all of these things in, but all good things for sure.
Totally. Yeah, wow, that's a lot of things. That's so great. Um, yeah, okay. And so as far as like jumping into the conversation today, I kind of just thought I'd like hit record when we first get on this, just to like kind of have the beginning be a little bit more like just like us talking rather than like like a very formal, you know,
Yeah.
start point. But yeah, so first off, this is actually the first of these interviews that I'm doing, like just because of how the timeline worked out. I have like another, I think like five that are set up just with different people who are doing workshops and stuff.
Cool.
And there's maybe a few other NEC people, like Lila Smith is doing one,
Oh, cool.
who is, yeah, yeah, and she's like doing cool stuff in LA now. So I'm really stoked about all of it. But yeah, this is the first one, and the idea is kind of like, besides just like shedding light on like what I'm doing teaching wise and the types of things that we're talking about and types of people that we're bringing in. Yeah, I think it's also cool to just try to like have these conversations with people who are making music at a really high level and kind of having the conversations be oriented towards um people who are interested in making like people who are interested in making creative music or challenging music or like interesting music, but aren't necessarily going to go to like a conservatory. Like maybe they're like in their mid 30s or whatever, and like they're in a stage of life where doing that wouldn't make sense. And so yeah, in the conversation, like I've got some questions and stuff listed, and I was
Okay.
just listening to the record, the solo record I think you put out in 2020. It's like
Mhm.
something body.
Yeah,
um
yeah. Blank body.
yeah, which is fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
But yeah, so as far as like the structure of the conversation, I'm thinking we can kind of start with your journey into music with the guitar, and then maybe talk a little bit about the time. I think you were playing jazz for a while before you came across free music, and if I'm mistaken there, totally like correct me. And then like once we start to get into you playing free music, then we can talk about realizations that happened along the way. I have some questions about like when you started working with prepared guitar and stuff like that. And so that's kind of
Okay.
what I'm thinking for like outline of the conversation.
Yeah, that all
Yeah,
that all sounds good.
cool.
It's cool to hear about the I'd love to hear more about your this program you're doing. So
Totally.
this is like a cohort of students that you have that are all sort of interested in experimental music or in improvisation, and it's like is it like a series, or it's like is it like your private students who you're like making this available to as a resource?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I guess where to start. It's like a whole thing. So I've been working on it for like 2 years in a pretty intense way. It's called Create Interesting Music. It's sort of like a coaching program for musicians. And we kind of start off by talking about fundamentals of like really knowing the guitar, like not like learning from tabs or whatever, which is like where a lot of people are kind of stuck. Um, and then as people build out these like foundations of the guitar, like there's sort of like fretboard fluency type things where people learn to deal with harmony and stuff like that. But as we get past that, it's really like goal setting towards specific like outcomes that different people want. And so in particular, I've got one student who's like a super deep like record like head. Like he's like super deep into like Japanese experimental music. Like I think that like I haven't thought about some of this stuff in a while, but like I think like Onkyo is like one of the scenes, like the really quiet stuff.
Oh yeah,
And he's
I'm well aware.
yeah. And then he was like we've been talking about like Taku Sugimoto recently, and we were talking about like Vondelweiser and like Michael Pizarro and like starting to deal with free music on the guitar. And so when I was asking students about like guests to bring in, like I was thinking about people that I know who are doing really cool like free improvisation stuff on the guitar. And yeah, you came to mind as like the first person. Yeah, because the way that you're doing it, I think, is also really aligned with a lot of things that the students talked about. But yeah, otherwise, like I have a couple of students who have been professional, like touring musicians. One of my students is like toured a lot as a guitarist. Another student has like a kind of like, I don't really know what to call it, like kind of beat music project called Botany. And he worked for the label Western Vinyl for a long time, maybe still works for Western Vinyl. And but he's kind of going back to the guitar. He studied jazz guitar, but he's trying to get back into it. I have another student who studied composition at Bowling Green and was doing some guitar stuff there also. And we started working together. I think he found me through YouTube actually, because I was just like uploading conversations with students to YouTube. And there was one where we were talking about my buddy Valentine, and a bunch of people like, or not that many people saw it in the grand scheme of things, but the people who did, like I had a few people who like reached out to me about it, which was really cool. So he found me that way. And in that student's case, we're doing a lot of like production and songwriting and like more just like working on jazz tunes because he kind of already has the avant-garde thing together because that's like what he studied in college. So it's kind of a range of students, but I'd say generally speaking, they're kind of like intermediate to advanced students who are interested in creativity in some way and they want to like learn the instrument in like a serious and rigorous way but in a way that's like aligned with their creativity, which I guess is like as like when I was kind of moving my teaching online and I was looking at like what else exists out there for like music education, like a lot of the guitar learn guitar online vibe is like not really maybe aesthetically aligned with like a lot of what I'm interested in. And like I guess with when students were seeking me out in New York, I think there was I think they were looking for something by working with me that they felt like I was maybe in touch with that was like aesthetic or was like artistic or something that a lot of people, like if you search like how to play guitar on YouTube, you're probably not going to find people who are super like art oriented for the most
Right.
part. And so that
Yeah,
seems
yeah.
to be kind of the niche that's like carved out. Yeah, and I can go a little more into depth if you're, and I can also just like show you the inside of it sometime and tell you more. But I guess kind of like painting in broad strokes, that's kind of what's going on. And in this like kind of in the fall and in the winter and spring, I'm trying to do a bunch of guest workshops. I did a wave of them last winter and spring, and like the first few people I brought on board were Joe Bransifort, if you know. Yeah, yeah, who's awesome. We did a workshop with him on Tuesday, actually, but he also did one last January. I brought Carla Kilstead on to do one, which was super cool. I brought on Max Light to do one, so that was very like guitar, which was awesome. And then a
Yeah.
few other people, Steve Becker, who's a guitarist who lives in Brooklyn and I think has some stuff out on like NNA tapes. And
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And then in this wave of things, kind of based on student requests. So there's some producers and some like engineers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But there's also this interest in like really avant-garde guitar stuff, which is really cool. It's really cool that students are like asking about
Great.
that. And I think because I've done like some of that, like I don't think I've made it as central in my creative practices as you have, but like because I've done enough of that that I can like talk about it. Like it seems like people want to talk about that, which is super cool. So I'm trying to like bring in more
Great.
resources to help them. Yeah.
Great. That all sounds awesome. It's cool that that's yeah, I mean, when you if you type things into YouTube, there's a very particular kind of approach to actually like any skill. I mean, it could be guitar, it could be like Photoshop, it could be anything like that. Like it always kind of directs you in a certain middle ground aesthetic place. So it's nice that you're making that available to people.
Totally. Yeah. So I've
Yeah,
got
so let's get into
yeah,
it.
yeah. Awesome. Cool. Wow. This is fun. This is exciting. Yeah. So first off, what led you to the guitar initially? Was it your first instrument?
No, it wasn't my first instrument. I wanted it to be my first instrument. I was drawn to music through the guitar. My dad was a really serious classical guitarist, and he used to do overnight. He used to work nights, and he would be gone like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., or maybe it was 6 to 6. Anyways, he would come home in the morning, and his way of decompressing was to shed. And he was practicing a lot at that time, and he was like ripping these classical pieces. And I remember I would like wake up in the morning and hear that sound, and I would like sit in the hallway. And I remember feeling I remember having like a really strong visual response to it too, like these sounds just like ping ponging around the hallway. I used to sit back there so that he wouldn't see me, so that he would just keep playing. And it made a really deep impact on me. I mean, the sound, specifically the sound of the nylon string guitar, was really what made me want to get into music. Um, when I said I wanted to start, my parents made me do piano first.
Hmm.
My mom was a pianist, and we had one in the house, and they decided that that would be like a good way to be a more well-rounded musician. And I got a teacher at first, but it was just kind of dry. I think I just had the wrong teacher. I mean, she was teaching me out of a book, and right away I wanted to be more like self-directed and creative with it. I remember I I brought her a composition like the second lesson, and she just kind of like poo-pooed it like to the side
Oh
and wanted
no.
to keep
Yeah.
teaching me out of the book, which I eventually got bored with. But I was doing it so that I could get to the guitar,
Hmm.
basically. Um, I also played um, a bit of saxophone, alto saxophone, for some amount of years, and I've definitely touched on other things over the years, and continue to play other instruments because I feel that's actually really important.
Hmm.
And it's just something like if I was on a desert island, I would just want to play everything all the time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I got into guitar maybe, it's I tell students this sometimes. It's hard for me to remember when I started, actually, because I didn't start formally. It was really like my dad when I did start actually learning guitar, and even when I was still doing piano, I would just like my dad would show me something, um, and I would just try to work it out. And I just remember these like little mini, like the guitar was just around, and I would like be outside playing whatever, come inside and like pick it up and play for a little bit, and it was just like this routine part of the day. It didn't feel really formal in any way until later. Um, so that was kind of my relationship to it until about, I don't know, I want to say like I started taking lessons in middle school, something like that, like with somebody else.
Mhm. Gotcha. Yeah, okay. And so I'm curious like from the period where you started like taking lessons like middle school to like finding jazz, like what was that part of the journey like?
Mm. So when I was in middle school, I mean, I was always kind of interested in jazz because um my my dad played a lot of like gypsy jazz in particular around the
Mhm.
house. He was really into that music. And also like more straight ahead stuff too. But I was always interested in improvisation. I was interested in this like idea of freedom in music and this sort of like purity of expression. That's really what got me into jazz. I played in a jazz band when I was in middle school, just like in school, and sort of through that did some community jazz bands. They were like regional and then eventually in high school a little bit. I also played saxophone in some of those bands, but guitar ended up being the thing that I focused on more. And I got really into jazz. I mean, I got really into um, but it was the sound, but it was even more than the sound. It was this idea of free expression. It was this idea of like being in the moment and realizing something that felt like really like organic, that felt like breath. Um, and I think free music and free jazz were always part of that trajectory for me. I mean, I remember one of the early jazz records or jazz guitar recordings that I heard that made a huge impression on me was Song X by Pat Metheny, which
Mhm.
is kind of a funny way to encounter Pat Metheny because it's like, I mean, I think it's the coolest thing he ever did and probably the most avant-garde thing he ever did. Um, but I was just really intrigued by that. Like I think when I first heard it, it was just almost like sensory overload. Like I was just like, what is happening in this music right
Yeah.
now? And that mysterious energy was that's what drew me to it. And um jazz was I think I saw jazz as I was interested in jazz for sure, but I think I mostly saw jazz as like a way to deal with improvisation.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot that I can relate to here, which is really cool. Yeah, okay. And so from jazz into free improvisation, like what was that trajectory like? Like I remember when I think because we started at NEC at the same time, I remember you were like a jazz guitar master student for like 3 days and then found out about CI and was like you were like, oh, that's the thing. Or at least
Yeah.
that's my recollection of it. So yeah, I'm curious about like um how you kind of came to prioritize free music. Like I guess for one thing, like did that happen at NEC or was it something that was happening before NEC?
Yeah, I think it was in motion
Hmm.
before NEC, and then when I got to NEC, it was like some other pieces fell into place. But I mean, in many ways, it was already sort of bubbling beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And it's also like, you know, at least in my life, the music that I've played has, it's always been relational. It's always been related to the communities I'm a part of. And I mean, music is like that, right? It's like very social. That's something that I love about improvised music in particular. It's like it's very social. It's like a microcosm of you know, politics in a way. It resembles conversation and all sorts of like social dynamics.
Hmm.
And when I was in, I did my undergrad in Reno, which is where I'm from, in
Hmm.
Reno, Nevada. And while I was there was definitely an interest in free music. I mean, my when I was a freshman in college, I was in a free improvisation ensemble,
Hmm.
like right away. I was really fortunate that the head of the department there, Peter Epstein, was had spent a lot of years, 10 years, I think, in New York, and was pretty involved in the free scene there, and really talked to us a lot about it. And from both like a jazz perspective and a bit more of like a classical perspective, like I remember my first semester in there, we were playing Stockhausen text scores, and we were um, also like dealing with states of mind in some interesting ways with some hypnosis techniques and some strategies for accessing um, what in my mind I guess is the equivalent of like, you know, what the abstract expressionists were, uh, painters were interested in, or just a lot of artists in general were interested in the 60s onward, like this automatic writing kind of thing, like pure subconscious. And so we did a lot of things surrounding that. And so that was always like, that really lit a fire in me. And I was always kind of pushing to try to find more opportunities to do more of that. But in Reno, uh it wasn't as much of an option. Like I spent a lot of years there being a little bit more of like functionally a working guitarist. Like I made a living playing gigs only, and it was sort of all over the map. And that's how people function. I mean, I think I think there were a lot of folks there who were interested in free improvisation. Um, but there just weren't the opportunities to play that music really.
Hmm.
And then when I got to NEC, all of a sudden it was like, oh wow, this is like a thing that I can actually do. Like there are people, and for sure, studying with Joe Morris was like a really huge, made a really huge impact on me because I was already into this stuff. But Joe really opened my mind and showed me a path forward of like, oh no, you can do this. Like this can be a musical life to
Hmm.
play music in this way, primarily as an improviser. And
Hmm.
I think somehow I just hadn't really considered that. I'd always felt like it had to be just like this side thing linked to another form of music making.
Hmm.
So yeah, NEC opened up things a lot. In terms of like the jazz thing, I mean, I wasn't I was aware of the CI department. And I almost applied to the CI department.
Hmm.
The really the only reason that I applied to the jazz department was I think I was actually just confused about how private lessons worked.
Oh yeah.
And there were some people folks that I wanted to study with who were like under the roster of the jazz banner.
Hmm.
Um, when I got there, come to find out that jazz meant something pretty different at NEC than what I thought it meant from my experience at my undergrad. Again, I was like really fortunate to have a pretty open-minded department. I think it was called, my degree is called Jazz and Improvisational Music. So
Hmm.
it was always with the understanding that it was this larger umbrella. And I mean, we played free, we studied like Indian classical music. Um, we played Stockhausen text scores. We, you know, performed free improvised concerts to, you know, silent film projections, and all of this was sort of in the considered under the umbrella of that department. When I got to NEC, I kind of quickly realized that a lot of the other folks who were coming in my year, um, they wanted to play like straight ahead jazz, and that was pretty much it. And so I transferred to CI mainly because of the degree requirements. It was just a more, once I realized that like you could kind of be in either one and just study with whoever you wanted to. Um, I liked the more open structure of the CI program and the fact that you could, there were less requirements, so you could just kind of take whatever. I was more interested in, for instance, I ended up for my music theory credit, I ended up taking Stratis Minakakis's class on Ligeti and Xenakis, which is way more interesting to me
Oh yeah.
than taking one of these classes on like big band writing, or I can't remember exactly what it was on the requirements, but it just felt like a better fit for my interests, and especially with only 2 years. I mean, part of me wishes I had more time there, because there was just, I mean, NEC provided such amazing resources.
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't have any time to waste. With only 2 years there, I wanted to do what I really wanted to do.
Totally. Wow. Well, this is great. Um, there's so much good stuff here. Yeah, so one of the things that I want to go back to is you were talking about in like your freshman year of undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
um having these experiences that kind of opened up your mind. I mean, playing Stockhausen pieces, thinking about like automatic writing and stuff like that. And I'd be curious to hear like, because sometimes the first year, the first 2 years in a space can be such like a transformative time. Like where like when you think about kind of crossing the threshold from like somebody who plays guitar in high school to feeling like you are like a like even if you're just in the state where you're like a working guitarist, or not just, but like crossing that threshold, being exposed to these things for the first time. And I guess I'm asking about things that are a while ago, but maybe for me, I remember all of it really well because I just had to practice so much to like get
Yeah.
the ground covered that I wanted to get covered. Because in my own like I'll keep it super brief, but like I started off at Oberlin as a liberal arts major because I didn't think that being a musician was going to be possible. And then I met jazz majors and was like, oh, I just have to know what to practice, and I have to spend like I just have to put in like a ton of hours. So for me, I
Yeah.
guess I remember those first like 2 or 3 years of trying to like go from like I know a little bit about this that I've kind of taught myself to like I'm really trying to do this. But yeah, I'd
Mhm.
be curious to hear like if you remember kind of where you were at musically when you first got to undergrad and how that changed in the course of like maybe the first year, what that was like. And also, just
Yeah.
sorry, really quick, I'm gonna turn on my lights. I'm realizing otherwise I'm gonna get really dark. So I'll be like 1 second.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you think?
All right. And we are back.
Cool. Um, yeah, I mean, when I came in as an undergrad, I mean, I couldn't play. Like I uh I was pretty green to playing jazz for sure. And also just having, I mean, I knew what I knew, but I I guess again it was like a blessing in disguise. It didn't feel like that at the time, but uh the level in my program was like really really high.
Mhm.
um and I guess in a similar kind of way, like I knew I always knew I wanted to be a musician, but I think I saw myself a bit more as like a composer.
Mhm.
When I came in, and like I played guitar and I played a bit of some other instruments, but I felt like that was more the direction that I was going in. And then I mean, I was in the jazz and improvisational music department because I had this interest in improvisation, and I wanted to
Mhm.
learn more about that and be around that. And I was really lucky that the level when I came in was like really really high.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going to jam sessions like my first couple weeks and just being totally just like thrown into the deep end. And that's basically the way it was for at least the first year. I felt I yeah, it was trial by fire. I mean, I learned a lot, and I realized pretty quickly the things that I needed to get together to function in that situation. Um, but that all led pretty naturally into becoming a working musician because all of these people were like gigging constantly, you know,
Mhm.
and I was just I was swimming in it. Like I was going to jam sessions all the time. I was practicing all the time. Basically, I was living at school, like in the practice rooms, and that's all I did for hardcore for a long time. Um, and it was definitely in some ways kind of like a rude awakening, but it also really like energized me a lot because it showed me that I it showed me a new way of relating to music, which I think that ended up becoming a reason that improvisation is so important to me because there is an immediacy to working with music in this way of like actualizing it in the moment of performance on the instrument that felt way more intuitive and felt way more natural than relating to it in this more composerly way that I had related to it before that, in
Mhm.
terms of like, oh, here's this melody and this counterpoint that I like, and you know, taking the time to like try out different combinations of things, different note choices, and then like crafting this. Like the improvisation felt like kind of bypassing all of that, and um, it felt more immediate to
Yeah.
me, and I think that that was the biggest realization in that time frame for me.
Yeah. And so if we were to even dig in a little bit deeper, if you know, and if like depending on how like high fidelity like your memory is of the details of this stuff, you know, like
Mm.
no worries, but no worries if you don't have some of the details still like in mind, but I'm curious like one like what were the things that you felt like you needed to get together in that period? And two, like how did you approach getting them together?
Mm.
Or like if we could even pick like one thing from that chapter.
I mean, there were so many things.
Yeah.
I think probably the number one thing
Hmm.
was getting my time together.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I remember one of the things early on that was a big um, that was immediately clear to me once I started going to jam sessions, right? Going to jam sessions regularly and playing gigs regularly, is that I was playing with these drummers who were just, you know, very free with the time and
Hmm.
um, playing things that like if you don't have your time together, you just immediately get lost.
Yeah.
And so like developing this really strong internal clock and um, awareness of awareness of the time in this way that you can play rubato over it, you can play any any subdivision over anything at any time and just have
Hmm.
that freedom of like with the subdivisions I think about it a lot in terms of switching gears on a bike, you
Yeah.
know, like those gears are always available. They're just like tapping into different frequency levels.
Hmm.
um or maybe like uh steam, water, and ice is another analogy,
That's
that
cool.
like these things are it's like the same substance but you can tap into different levels of frequency with it.
Yeah.
So long story short, getting my time together was a big thing.
Yeah. I have
And
a
also,
question there actually. Sorry, because I
yeah.
think time is just such a good example of this. Like, so I'm curious, were there specific exercises or types of exercises that you remember being especially helpful? Like, for example, like for me, like the first time I tried to play with a metronome at like quarter equals 40, you know, or like eighth note, but you know, having a click at 40 BPM and turning it into something. Maybe it's a whole note, maybe it's
Yeah,
you know, like feelings like a click that far apart and trying to fill it up with an even number of notes within that space was like
totally.
insane when I first started. Like, were you working on that sort of thing, or like, yeah, other
Yeah, yeah.
exercises?
No, definitely. That's a really good I did stuff like that. I would have you know, first you start with having a click on 2 and 4, and then eventually maybe just on 2, and then maybe
Hmm.
on like the and of 2, and then maybe on like the and of two on the first bar of every four, and then just playing these different kinds of games of like increasing complexity where you're feeling, because yeah, when you have to subdivide a larger chunk of time, and this is actually something that like um I've heard from Lee Konitz, I've heard from Ron Miles, I've heard from um, so many great improvisers, that like feeling larger chunks of time gives you this sort of freedom of expression where like you're not getting lost in the sauce of like this eighth note. I mean, of course, there's an awareness of like I'm pushing this one, I'm dragging this one back in
Hmm.
terms of like the eighth note level or triplet level fidelity, but
Hmm.
having that longer term sense of form, even to the point where like a downbeat is a 32 bar form.
Hmm.
Feeling those larger sections of time with like this. And I think a big part of it, probably the most important part of it, is physicalizing time.
Hmm.
Like that was, I think that was something that was blocking me early on, because I was um it's like when you're hearing all these subdivisions coming from all over the place, like my tendency in that moment, in my inexperience, was to like hunker down and like try to count it out and try to like kind of project my sense of time onto the situation, rather than letting the situation tell me what was happening, if that makes sense. Like for
Hmm.
instance, like listening to a drummer, like listen to how that drummer is like placing the time, and that like once at a certain point, if you listen enough, they're telling you where it is, no matter how abstracted it is, like they're telling you where it is, their body is telling you where it is.
Hmm.
And to get back to the physicalized thing, I told you my mentor there was really into Hindustani music, and so I had this class along with the free ensemble my freshman year that was called I think like jazz rhythmic theory or something like that, but it was really not about jazz at all. It was like just a lot of like odd time signature stuff, like Indian classical. Like we studied like some Bulgarian music, Macedonian music, and something that he taught us, which is a counting system from um, from Hindustani music, or maybe it's Carnatic. I can't remember which, but it's like using the joints of your finger to count.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know, where when you have a longer form, so it's like you're keeping that beat, and you physically know where the one is.
Hmm.
Like that would be the first stage of that. You could do something similarly too, of like if you're walking, right left, and then you just like clap on every other right.
Hmm.
So you physicalize it in this way of like your body knows where those larger downbeats are. You're not thinking about it. I mean, I think something that I wish I would have gotten to earlier with this, like if I could talk to, I don't know, 17-year-old Drew and give them one piece of advice, it would be to that if you're thinking, you're already lost, you know, with all of this stuff, with rhythm, with harmony, with improvising. If you're thinking, you're already lost.
Amazing. Wow. There's so much good stuff here. Cool. Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a really helpful thing to think about digging into for people who are in that transitional period.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm sure we could just talk about the other things from that year for like the full amount of time that we're talking. But if we were to move forward a little bit, as you kind of moved into free improvisation, like it sounds like you had a lot of impactful experiences like right up front when you were in school. And like, yeah, I can relate to that a little bit because even though I was like a liberal arts student at Oberlin, I was able to take courses on like South Indian percussion and like rhythmic syllables in like year
Mhm.
one, or I was able to like talk my way into like electroacoustic music classes and stuff like that. And so
Mhm.
all of these kind of like fringe topics, it was really cool that I was able to, or not maybe not fringe topics, but like if like relative to some central thing of like playing jazz guitar or whatever, or like
Yeah.
composing, like these more like I don't know. Kind of, they're not really niche, but you know what I mean. Like it was cool encountering those things earlier on. I'd love to hear like as you started to take playing free music seriously, whether there were things along the way there that that felt like they really unlocked it for you? And like maybe another way to approach this topic, I wrote down a bunch of potential questions about this stuff. Is like, um, when I hear, and this isn't like any shade or anything, but when I hear people who maybe didn't go to like music school, kind of like jamming in a free way,
Mm.
there's like a different feeling of like sharpness or like rigor or something than people who have really pursued and studied like free improvisation. And so I'd be curious to hear as you were kind of crossing that threshold from like jamming into like taking free music like really seriously, yeah, whether there were specific things along the way that were especially helpful for you. And from there, I might kind of like try to dig down into learning techniques and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. I mean, I think I think one of the reasons why this direction really blossomed for me at NEC is
Hmm.
because I always took it seriously.
Yeah.
And I think one of my frustrations was that um, there weren't as many people around me who took it seriously in that same way. And
Hmm.
um, honestly, it's a frustration I have still here in New York in some respects where like um, I think it's not a better or worse thing, but there is a fundamental difference between improvisation functioning as either like a compositional element or an aesthetic decoration and it being like the fundamental driver of musical material.
Hmm.
I think those two things are fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about improvisation functioning as a compositional element, the whole frame of mind is different, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're taking it from a jazz perspective, it's like okay, like you play an ornette head, for instance, and like that melody influences maybe the opening phrases, like you reference some of the intervallic content, you transpose things, um, rhythmically mutate things. Um, and even in that situation where there's no chord changes, it's still like the composition is determining a lot of things. The composition is determining melodic contours, rhythmic contours. It's determining, but and maybe the biggest thing that it's determining is roles within that ensemble.
Yeah.
Um, Something that I became really interested in it at NEC and continue to be really interested in, and I think is actually maybe one of the biggest fundamental differences between, um, I don't know, like the attitude of jamming. I
Yeah.
don't know what that means. It probably means different things to different people. Um, but one of the fundamentally different things is like to, to me what the really interesting music that happens in free improvisation is when assumed roles within an ensemble are questioned in a
Hmm.
radical way. Um, for instance, if you're in like a situation in which a drummer starts playing something like really implying like a certain kind of time feel, and that's something that's like coming back again and again and again and again, it contextualizes the music in this way of like, okay, well, now there's this really clear time happening. So I have to either go along with it or I have to intentionally play against it. And what it does is it immediately like stratifies the whole thing into these layers of functional roles of like a rhythm section and then
Hmm.
maybe like a horn playing a melody on top of it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think that like there's a right answer here. I
Yeah.
think people have to suss that out for themselves. But I think maybe a big difference is just that like whether somebody has spent the time to question those assumptions and to explore other ways of music making that don't include, for instance, if you're a bass player, like laying down this like pad foundation that's outlining a certain sort of harmonic. The same thing goes for harmony, by the way, as like a drummer playing a beat. If
Yeah.
somebody's sort of like insistently playing like melodies or like a bass line or something that strongly suggests C minor, it becomes very difficult to deal with that because all of a sudden, like there's this strong harmony being implied, and you have to either go along with it or you
Mhm.
don't, and it sort of hijacks this the open nature of like a conversation. It's like, I mean, it's like the equivalent of like if you're having a conversation with somebody and they're talking about like uh the walk that they just took their dog on, and then you're like, okay, well, but I'm thinking of like making this plan with dinner with my other friends, and then they just keep telling you about their dog walk, like they're not listening to you, and they're not, and then there's not an open exchange of ideas. It's like it starts to dominate the whole situation. So those are things that I find really salient. Maybe one other thing that I'll add, that that is important just to me personally is, um, the way that phrases are formed collectively.
Mm.
Um, I, I'm interested in like a type of, or at least possibilities in rethinking the way that like ensembles can interact,
Mhm.
um, on the same plane. So in other words, not even if like assumed roles are deconstructed, there's still a certain kind of, maybe coming more out of free jazz, there's a certain way of playing that um assumes these like linear relationships of what each person is playing to itself, like, and there's a lot to talk about there, because there are some really interesting properties of like if something has a connective tissue within it, like an artistic integrity that holds that line together as a singular statement, and then it's stacked on top of something else that also has that connective tissue. Those two things are going to work regardless of what else is happening, and that's interesting in and of itself. um, but what I'm talking about is a more like interpenetration between those two layers, where phrases are formed collectively, like counterpoint is formed, and the effect of the thing becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. Yeah. And so maybe this brings me to like your experience studying with Joe or studying with Joe Morris.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'd love to hear, I mean, similarly, kind of in your first, I mean, for one thing, did you study with him for the full 2 years?
yeah, I studied with
Okay.
him for the full two
Okay.
years.
Yeah. Maybe if we were to focus even on the first year, or even the first semester, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about how your playing changed and whether there were things that you worked on in that time that were useful for you.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like I said, Joe totally changed my direction, and just Joe's an incredible teacher and an incredible improviser and human being. I mean, I think I wouldn't be the player that I am today without him. That's no exaggeration at all. I think that he, he in a way, like he was really good at taking the mysticism out of it, which
Mhm.
sounds counterintuitive, because I do relate to this music in a very spiritual way. But it's not to say that like there was no it's not to color it as something that's like cold or whatnot. It was just that
Yeah.
Joe had this very direct way of
Yeah.
breaking things down into their parts, in this very practical way of working on things, and of looking at the way that these musics are looking breaking down like different approaches to playing this music. And I think that that's really, um that's what you should get out of a musical education, is that you should be shown examples of how to world build.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems, I think, in music education, like broadly speaking, is that a lot of the times music programs, and I'm speaking maybe a little bit more about jazz programs, but for sure classical programs too,
Mhm.
um, they function more along the lines of a trade school than art school. They
Yeah.
function along the assumption that they're going to prepare you to be employable in an orchestra or a big band or whatever imaginary career situation that doesn't exist anymore,
Yeah.
that the founders of the program had in their minds. um, Versus in art school, it's like, yeah, you're going to study Pollock, you're going to study Sam Gilliam, you're going to study Ad Reinhardt, but the idea at the end of it all is that you're going to absorb these influences and come out the other end with your own voice. And
Yeah.
I think that Joe was so instrumental in just, by breaking these things down and by understanding like how parts can potentially relate to each other, and then how those larger sections can relate to other sections, and then like the scale, you scale it up again and again and again, and pretty soon you have a whole language and you have a whole world and you have a whole um, lexicon. And 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 that's, I mean, that's it. I think that's really like, if you're going to take improvised music seriously, or any music for that matter, but especially with improvisation, it's like you're creating your own language. And I think that's a misconception that some people have about this music. It's like, I even had a lot of people at NEC asking me like, oh, like you're an improviser, right? Like do you practice? Like what do you practice? And it's like, they because they just fundamentally don't understand what's going on. And I think that attitude is maybe what you're talking about when you talk about people like jamming, or there's like a lack of I don't know, like rigor, or I think that's the word you used. If there's a lack of rigor, then it stems from this attitude of like, oh, it's free music, so anything goes. In a way, I would say that in some ways less goes.
Yeah.
It's like when you don't have chord changes, when you don't have any sort of form or rhythmic structure to adhere to, it's like you have to create those structures yourself. And freedom is only free in relationship to something. Like if you say play me anything, um it may or may not be good. I mean, I think the most productive thing in music is, especially in improvisation, is when there's like, you hear that there's this like pushing up against the limits of something, like you put some, it may be conscious or may not. I mean, in the act of improvising, again, like I think if you're thinking about these things, you're already lost. But in terms of preparing yourself for that situation, thinking about parameters and thinking about um, creating situations that force you into musical situations that maybe you wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. Creating world building, world building.
Yeah. And so, yeah, one of the things that I had written down a few questions
Mm-hmm.
about here was that it seemed like one of the it seems like, and I feel like I'm like aware of your trajectory, but I'm not like a scholar of your trajectory or anything. So definitely corrects me here if I'm misremembering something. But it seems like there was a point at which you really decided to embrace like the tabletop guitar, or like turning the guitar on its side. And I had a lesson with Joe when I first started to ask him about free music, where he was talking about the difference between, like having the guitar as a plane this way that you can run your fingers with, versus like when you turn it, you rotate it, and all of a sudden the whole kind of nature of the instrument changes because you lose the, fingers moving over the fretboard type thing. Like,
Right.
I'm curious, when you started to rotate the guitar, and maybe deal with like prepared guitar, which is obviously like a gigantic world. Like, I don't want to say like prepared guitar is in like it's a fixed thing, but like starting to incorporate objects, starting to expand the way that you're dealing with sound or creating sound on the guitar. Like, do you remember what your first few steps were in doing that? Did you have a start point?
I think there's a lot of ways to start this, because I mean, one part of it is influences,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, like, I was very aware of Keith Rowe, was very
Mm-hmm.
aware of Fred Frith, and a lot of folks who have who have done this sort of thing. Um, I do remember really liking this analogy that Keith Rowe had about the laptop guitar, that he drew an analogy to the way that Pollock would put the canvas on the floor.
Mhm.
Um, and I really liked that. I really liked the relationship there.
Mhm.
I think for me, it didn't all happen at once. It's not like just decided like, okay, I'm going laptop. Uh, Laptop sounds like a computer.
Yeah, but I know what
Um,
you mean. Yeah.
I didn't like, there wasn't a hard line. It was
Hmm.
more just like I got really interested in how do I deal with timbre in the same way that one would deal with the tension and resolution within harmony.
Yeah.
Like how is what is timbral tension and resolution mean, and how can that like have its own, it's like it felt like a, when I started thinking about it, it felt like this whole other dimension of music that especially on the guitar is not really dealt with. And I liked using physical objects because I like being able to um physically play things rather than, I mean, I went through a phase when I was back on the West Coast of being really into pedals and using a lot of effects and things like that. And I always found that they they fell a bit flat because of the assumptions inherent in their construction, right? They're
Mhm.
made for like, okay, in this section of the song, I'm like putting on this phaser. And so they're stomp boxes, it's an
Yeah,
on off
totally.
switch. Like you can't use it to the same effect that a cellist can overbow, for
Hmm.
instance. Um, so I became interested in using objects in that way to expand the palette. Um, I also think that there was something um, necessary for me in, well, like in with that record that you were checking out, Blank Body. um I did sort of decide that for that record it was going to be all lap stuff. Like I
Hmm.
wasn't going to play the guitar upright really at all.
Hmm.
um and that was, which is part of where the name of the record comes from. I felt like at a certain point I needed that,
Hmm.
because it felt like a refocusing of the ear on the
Yeah.
instrument, and putting yourself in situations where you don't 100% know what things are going to sound like, and you have to just like really follow your ear and really follow your instincts, um, is really clarifying. I mean, when you play an instrument for a really long time, I mean, you probably know this, uh, you just get so familiar with how everything sounds, and your
Yeah.
fingers, your hands know patterns, and your fingers know, um, where every note next to the one you're playing is.
Hmm.
Um, and it sometimes it's really helpful to just break those things. And then when you come back on the other side, you see it from a very different perspective. Another thing that comes to mind is I'm a big Cy Twombly fan, and he at one point was doing this study where he was drawing with his left hand in the dark, and it it was like a way of he described it as a way of like unlearning everything that he did
Yeah.
in art school. He was interested in this, I think in some senses the same thing as this automatic writing through a little bit of a different lens, because he was into like all of this antiquity stuff. But there's something to be said for um having to like start from nothing, like really doing something to radically put yourself in a situation where you have to. And that's what I continue to really like about playing in that orientation, is that you do have to like fully invent new ways of playing.
Hmm.
because there's not really a precedent for it, right? Like you're coming up with your own techniques, you're coming up, and a big thing that opened up for me in that process, and that I also was kind of after in recording that record, was having the other hand free, um, in this way of like thinking about the guitar more as like a counterpoint instrument, thinking
Hmm.
more um, polymetrically, polyrhythmically, and structuring structuring things like these 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 spaces of like many parts relating to each other over long periods of time, like long cycles intersecting and interacting, and uh, not feeling like this need to, I don't know, like insert something that I already knew into the situation. You know, like there's this tendency sometimes when you're improvising to just jump to something that you know. Like, and a lot of times it happens right when you're on the verge of discovering something really important, actually. Like those are the moments when it's almost like fear of the unknown kicks in or something, and you just like, there's this need to like fill the space, and you just jump back to something that feels comfortable just because out of familiarity.
Hmm.
And it's in those moments that if you keep pushing, you find things that might really surprise you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm gonna sit with that. Yeah, wow. Um, yeah, and so this kind of makes me think of something that I had written down as a question, but as
Mhm.
I was writing it down, I kind of already felt like I knew the answer, which has to do with like as you're working with implements, um, or preparations or different objects that you can kind of use to interface with the guitar, like
Mhm.
how much planning, like goes into that or into exploration. But I mean, like based on, I mean, my own experiences of improvising, which are really distinct in a lot of ways from the process of composing. Like when I was in my mid 20s and I was really serious about sort of like avant-garde composition, I'd spend a lot of time in this sort of like pre-compositional stage where I'd be exploring the techniques of different instruments and exploring notations, almost like building a palette. But it was
Mhm.
very like methodical and structured. And with improvising, it was like I was improvising my way into a language. And it was
Yeah.
almost like I didn't want to like repeat myself. Like, I mean, just the classic, like every guitarist does it, but like you set your pickup or like on an electric guitar to like the
Mhm.
bridge, and then your fingers are way up over, where the pickups usually are, and you're doing stuff with your fingers and things.
Yeah.
Like, the way that I felt like I was able to sort of like start to carve my way out of the cliches towards something that felt a little bit more distinctive in that space was
Mhm.
just through like doing it a lot and developing opinions as I go and stuff like that. And so maybe if I were to extract like a procedure from what you're talking about, it sounds like one of the things that's going on is like identifying a parameter within what you're doing that you think is interesting and starting to like play with that parameter as sort of like a generative thing. And I mean, I think by the time that you're at the stage that you're at, you're like thinking on many levels at once and you have a pretty significant vocabulary. But I think you in the earlier stages of approaching this stuff, like
Mhm.
by directing attention towards parameters of a sound that are interesting to you that aren't necessarily things that you might get assigned in like almost any like music theory class, like Ligeti and Xenakis is a really cool class, but like not like playing over 5-1, like um that I don't know, that seems like something that I might recommend as a start point. Like how do you feel about that? Like I mean, this is like a way simplification of a lot of amazing things that you just said, but does that like yeah, how does that like sit with you?
I think the first thing is to have an idea, is to develop an idea of what you're interested in sonically, you
Yeah.
know. um Paradoxically, you also will find things that you like sonically through the process of doing it. And I mean, that's the great thing about improvisation, is that like you just have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, you just and that was another thing that I got from Joe that was like really, really helpful. It's like it's easy to overthink things
Hmm.
and it's easy to get I think there's a real danger in getting too conceptual with music making.
Yeah.
Um, I definitely have found myself in that place. And I know some people thrive like that. I'm not knocking it, but to me music is like a telepathic communication. You know, vibrations don't mean anything. It's not like making a film where you're dealing with uh literal objects and concepts and dialogue and things like that. Like music is just sound, and it's very intuitive the way it hits, and everybody's different. So I would say like just start doing it. You know, don't be too precious about it. Just do it, and you're going to find things. And when you find those things, that's where the work comes in.
Yeah.
Once you find things that resonate, um that's when you start, you know, this is like the raw clay, and then you start working with it and molding it, and the only way you get better at it is by doing the thing, is by that, you know, that process of like building something and then, you know, improving upon it, playing around with it, letting it sit, coming back to it later. I think recording yourself is really important because uh, you know, this stuff is very effervescent. It's immediately lost in the ether. So if you're going to actually seriously work on a space you're developing, it has to be more than just like trying to remember how that thing felt, because it you can very easily like forget what was actually going on. So I would suggest that start with just improvising, um, and then record yourself, and then afterwards, um, you know, write down things that were working, and listen back, and try to be very practical, because there's like the emotional thing, and there's like sometimes there's certain ways of describing it that feel more real than like the practicality of what you're doing. But in my experience, it's very easy to uh like come back to those words and forget what the feeling actually was. So as practical as you can be, like, oh, I was like, you know, playing phrases with like the back of this knife and then flipping it over and using some of the grains on the low strings, and then, you know, it was just try to describe it in as much detail as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's a good place to start. And then you really have to play with other people too. I mean, this stuff, it's difficult. I mean, if you're working on solo stuff, that's one thing. But I think this stuff also really blossoms when it's used in different contexts. You know, it's like I feel like I discover new uses of things all the time, because I have one way that I do it when I'm playing solo, and then I'm all of a sudden I'll be in a group situation and something totally different is happening, and I go to this thing because I hear it, and it almost like doesn't even sound like the same implement or the same sound, because of the context has changed so
Yeah.
much. So I think that working these things out with like real other humans is pretty essential.
Um, cool. And so from here, I've got one more question, which is maybe
Mhm.
jumping a little bit ahead from things that would be useful for people who are in the earlier stages of development, just kind of getting a glimpse of where you're at now. Like one of the things that I think has stood out to me when I've heard you play recently, like I think maybe the last one that I saw you play was when Hypersurface played on Fall Line, which was the concert series I was running for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think also just through like different like I don't know Instagram clips and like just I don't know random things that I've come across, um, as well as what I was just listening to the Blank Body record, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. There's like a sensitivity to sound where it sounds like some of the things that you're working with, like there's a pitch component that's very in this sort of world of like harmonics and harmonics that don't always just sound like they're part of like low parts of a harmonic series, not just always like this like
Mhm.
drone zone, but really crazy pitches that are not equal tempered that come from different kind of friction approaches. to the guitar, and there's also often sort of like a noise presence in what you're doing, meaning just like pitch that isn't, or sound that isn't so easily mappable to like a clear pitch.
Right.
And there's this also, there's like a sensitivity to these sort of like micro rhythms, like these tiny rhythmic components that are like within a
Yeah.
sound. And it's a little bit difficult to ask about elements of people's projects or elements of people's work that they're like super close to materially. And I feel like any question that I would have to start to open up what I'm thinking about is going to be like a little bit flawed. But I'm wondering, maybe just a way into asking about it is like, would you say would you say that there are certain experiences with sound that you're particularly interested in right now? Or like, how are you? I mean, and if it's purely like procedural, then that's also like totally fine. But yeah, like, would you say that there are sound worlds that you're working towards? And if so, I would just love to hear about them in whatever way feels worth communicating about them. You know, this is a tricky thing to ask about. Um, but
Yeah, I mean, no, I think it's a good question, and I think the difficulty in answering it is just in terms of like how to describe it, because to me it's so much of a feeling, and
mhm,
it's so much of like um how how parts are put together in the moment and how they relate to each other. So like a lot of what I practice is more on just like focusing on the materials themselves so that when I get into the situation of playing, they're ready, you know, they're on lock. Like those materials are ready to be used in a creative way.
mhm,
Um, but I am working on for sure a lot of specific things right now. One thing that comes to mind is I've been playing a lot more nylon string recently. Uh, Including in this large ensemble by Carlo Costa, which we're doing a show next week actually, and it's more a little bit more composition oriented, but it's something that I've been interested in that context, and also just I've been practicing a lot of nylon string recently, kind of coming full circle back to my early memories of the guitar. Uh, there's something about that instrument that is just so dynamic. Like you can play a single note, a single pitch, and just get so many different iterations of it. And that fascinates me. Just like thinking about articulation, because ultimately, like noise is kind of articulation. Like
mhm.
we already listen to noise in music all the time,
Yeah.
uh, and it's like the way that noise colors a melody that is super interesting to me. And I guess that's describing this tension, timbral tension and release. But like, I mean, when I'm playing you know, with the guitar face down laptop, I'm like very much thinking about melodies. Like I'm playing melodies, even if they're very abstracted. It's always coming from a place of melody. It's never just, and I think maybe that's part of what you're getting at with micro rhythms, um, but just being very present in like every single little second of whatever's going on, whether it's something sustained or not. Um, because I think like being very present in the sound in just this like observing way opens up these little doorways that can then become um, opportunities to develop the thing further. Like when we're improvising as the primary mode of generating material, we have to be like really good listeners, because your ear is the only friend you have in that moment in terms of generating generating new ideas, generating new interest in whatever's going on. Um, so nylon string is, is one thing I've been working on. Um, Another thing that I've worked with a bit already in the form of like using multiple amps, but spatialization
Hmm.
is something that I'm working on a lot, particularly for this piece I'm developing right now with Aaliyah Ultan. Um, it's very it's very based on sort of like an immersive listening environment and using like space itself as an instrument.
Hmm.
Um, so I suppose it's a little bit more of like a technical thing, but I do think that it changes and reframes the ways in which you think about sound. Because if you're thinking about something in terms of like a linear melody, you're going to play differently than if you think about something in terms of like an environment.
Yeah.
And I guess this is something that's always like really fascinated me, and it's definitely on my mind when I talk about world building, is this feeling of like being inside a sonic moment, like it's a physical room, you know, rather than thinking of things in terms of this like linear narrative plane. It's like um an environment that you're just inhabiting, and I think that engenders a really really different kind of listening, and
Hmm.
that kind of listening is um a lot more interesting to me than listening for like I don't know, purely melodic and harmonic development.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, this is fantastic. I know that we're already a little bit beyond the time window that we talked about, but one of the things I'm dying to ask you about, and we can keep it brief for or maybe if we cross paths sometime soon, I can just ask you about it in person. But this idea of like world building
Mm-hmm.
is something that I'm thinking about more and more explicitly in my own work. And as I've started to really deal with it like as like a word that feels very central to me,
Yeah.
it's clarifying a lot. Because like I think from the outside, my own output in the last 5 years probably looks pretty scattered to people who are not me. And like on the inside, like I know what I'm kind of after, but
Mm-hmm.
it's been interesting to try to figure it out. Yeah, this is a word, yeah, just that I've been using pretty explicitly in my own thinking around my work recently. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're thinking about world building or like what that word means to you or what saying that like opens up for you, how it feels to say it.
I think it relates to parameters, you know, and it relates to the way like the practice of improvisation and just like the way it works. You know, like if you're thinking about writing, it's fundamentally different than thinking about like writing a piece, right? Like when you write a piece, it's like this is this codified statement that has an arc to it, and it has this I don't know, sound palette or whatever. And maybe there is some world building in there. But I guess what I mean by world building is something more flexible. I mean, if you're imagining that you're going to improvise a certain kind of space and have a high level of control over that space, then it's building a world that's not fixed, but it's dynamic. And every time you hear it, it's going to be a little bit different. And it's adaptable to different circumstances. It's adaptable to relating to different players in different ways, in different moments, in different rooms. And that's what I mean is by it's creating a vocabulary that can be used in a variety of different situations and can take on different it's very contingent. It can take on different meanings in different contexts, and um, that is, I think, just necessary as an improviser, um, because again, we're operating in this way where like supposedly there's unlimited freedom, but everybody has a voice. You know, there's a reason why um, Evan Parker sounds like Evan Parker. You know, I was actually, you know, something that is related to this that I still remember because it struck me so much reading it for the first time is in Derek Bailey's improvisation book. He talks about um, trying to like cultivate this sense of newness, even with vocabulary that's very very familiar. And it was super striking, especially coming from someone like Bailey with like such a specific palette. It's like you immediately know it's Derek Bailey,
Hmm.
but even within those like what a lot of the time were pretty limited parameters, he was like finding new things within that. um you could also think about someone like Feldman, for instance, who had such a specific sound world, but he was always like going deeper and deeper into it and finding these subtle relationships between things. And I mean, there's different kinds of artists. Like some people tend to go like wide and some people tend to go like very very narrow, very focused work that's about like very specific questions. So different people's worlds end up looking pretty different, but I think what undergirds it for me is just this like flexibility in execution and flexibility in context while maintaining some sort of identity.
Hmm. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you for this. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
great.
thanks,
Yeah,
it was a great conversation. Thanks for suggesting this.
totally. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think for now we've got it. And
Cool.
yeah, we'll do the workshop on Monday, which I'm stoked for.
Yeah, sounds good. So it starts at 6 p.m., yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you want me to like how I don't know how you've been conducting these. Like do you have a vision for like um how like are you gonna do you have a vision for the structure of the thing or
Yeah, yeah, there's some flexibility there. I think, I mean, I can definitely send you past examples of workshops. Workshops with different people have gone in pretty different directions. Generally speaking, students have questions, and I'll
yeah.
just open things up for questions.
Mhm.
And yeah, it'll kind of things can move in many different directions. Like in past workshops, I've had students like share work, like tracks that they're working on.
Okay.
Or share like performances or like audio that we can kind of like talk about. And I think what will likely happen in your situation is that I'm sure my student Riley will have like a bunch of questions,
Hmm.
and I feel like the responses that you have would be fantastic. um so that's kind of what I have in mind. I mean, I think having an instrument on hand is good to go, and or like that'll be good. And then if necessary, I can kind of create structure in the conversation.
Hmm.
Um, but I've seen like there have just been so many things that have opened up for me, kind of keeping my mouth shut and just letting people ask questions. That's kind of been my starting point. But I can send some past examples for workshops if that would be useful for you, just so you can see what they have looked like.
Okay, no, I mean, as long as I was just checking if you had any sort of like um any preconceived ideas about time limits or anything like that.
Oh yeah, it'd be like
I
2 hours. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll probably want to do like some amount of playing just to
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of demonstrate things, and then yeah, we can just open it up for questions and take it from there.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's great to see you. Hopefully, we cross paths soon, sometime outside of virtual space and teaching space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All
Cool.
right. Yeah,
Thanks,
take
Cole.
and send me info about your shows that are coming up. I'd love to come through.
Definitely. Yeah, next one is on November 6th at St.
Okay,
Michael's.
cool. That's pretty
If you're
soon.
around. It's
Yeah.
that Carlo Costa large ensemble, and also Stephen. I'm playing in a Stephen Long piece that's like I think it's like 70 people, so it's
Whoa.
gonna be pretty
Okay,
epic.
cool.
Um, yes, St. Michael's Church.
All right, put it in the calendar. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Cole.
All right. See
Ciao for now.
ya.